Hi, this is Dr. Alexander Schuster, host of the Natural Health Summit. And I'm here today with Michael Morningstar to follow up on the interview we had on the Natural Health Summit a month or so ago on emotional freedom technique, on EFT. And just to give you a little bit of a reminder, the Natural Health Summit is there to provide you with cutting-edge natural alternatives to some of the conventional therapies that are out there. And I believe that human beings, we're not just a physical inert body, but we also have a mental level and an emotional level and even a spiritual level. And oftentimes, addressing the physical level only by itself, while absolutely essential, may not be sufficient to promote optimal, vibrant health. And so I'm very excited that we can share with you today this emotional freedom technique, which is much better seen than just heard about. Right? So during the interview we had in the last season of the Natural Health Summit, it was a phenomenal interview. Michael was explaining to us what emotional freedom technique is and what it can do for us. And then he walked us through a process. But at that point, we thought that the best thing to do would be to illustrate that by having a Hangout, a Google Hangout, where you could actually see how it's being done and not just hear it. So that's what we're here for today. And to give you a little bit of a background on Michael, he is the author and developer of the newest Perfect Health System. He's worked alongside celebrities like Tony Robbins and Deepak Chopra, Mark Victor Hansen, and the founder of EFT, Gary Craig. He is an emotional freedom technique practitioner. He's a certified neurolinguistic programming practitioner, an expert in timeline therapy, Chopra Center Perfect Health trainer, and Robbins Research International trainer. And so this gentleman, after 20 years in corporate sales, in 1995 he experienced an epiphany of body, mind, and spirit and applied this profound wisdom to eliminate all health challenges. Prescription and over-the-counter medications are now gone, and now he enjoys perfect health. And his lab work shows absolutely phenomenal biomarkers. And I believe you have completed 4 marathons as well that validates really that he walks the talk. And he's healthier now than in his 20s. So I'm very excited to, and truly honored again, to have him back here with us on this Hangout. So Michael, welcome back.
Alexander, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for having me back to share this information with all the listeners and now viewers on Natural Health Summit, because as we did the early interview that aired on November the 18th, I talked about how exciting it would be to share this information, and even though it was in an auditory form, I planted the seed that you and I were going to do a hangout, and so it's very exciting that this is actually coming to fruition today.
Yes, absolutely, and it is indeed the first hangout that I think for both of us, and it may very well become the format of choice for the Natural Health Summit in the future when we do future seasons of the Natural Health Summit. And for anybody that isn't familiar with the Natural Health Summit, you can find out more about it at www.naturalhealthsummit.com.
Absolutely. As you and I have begun to experiment with Google Hangout, I think we both see the power of communicating information not just in an auditory fashion, but also in a visual and kinesthetic, because people like to learn in different modalities, and this is a way that we can communicate more information more quickly, more effectively, and not just try to describe. As you know, it was a little bit difficult for me to describe the tapping because it's such a visual process. So I'm excited today that our outcome is to go into emotional freedom techniques EFT in greater detail, give specific examples of how it has benefited children with learning in school, helps reduce stress, improve learning ability, recall, helps make it better for the teachers to be more interactive with the students, helps the parents, obviously, because this is a big challenge with students today, learning challenges. EFT has a lot of applications for young people. It has a lot of applications in relationships, a lot of, we've just come off of Thanksgiving, so a lot of people had a lot of emotional stress, anxiety, some overeating, probably some weight gain. And as I said in our interview, that coming up to the holidays between Thanksgiving and Christmas, there's a lot of stress, anxiety, and people turn to eating to try to satisfy some of those emotional issues. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll be giving specific examples, specific terminology, more detail about how EFT works, and we'll run through EFT tapping points and different nuances. There are so many applications with health issues, with pain, with anxiety, with phobias. I could go on, but I know we want to jump in and start showing people. But I think it's important that people realize it's unlimited in potential. We have a saying in the EFT environment to try it on everything, and as people do this, they're finding amazing benefits. As I mentioned before, people have even seen a benefit in using EFT with their pets, because their pets also have acupressure points and sometimes emotional type issues. And again, these emotional issues are a result of training, conditioning. It affects our psychology, it affects our physiology, and it's part of the programming that we go through. So that's why we're going to talk about that and how powerful EFT is, the founder of EFT, and just a lot of information. So it's going to be a great jam-packed session today. In 1 hour, I believe we can cover enough background information as well as specifics that people will leave this hangout with the ability to start tapping on issues that pop up and share it with other individuals so that they can start seeing some rapid results.
Awesome. Well, Michael, I am very excited about that. We can share this with our audience and viewers. I think EFT has phenomenal potential, and maybe you can remind us where EFT came from and what it has been used for, and also maybe a little bit more about your own background and how you have come to become an expert in EFT.
Great. I'd like to do that. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I think people want to know who you are and why you are considered an expert in the information you're about to share, because a lot of people talk a lot of information. They may not have the experience and background. So very quickly, I'm a family man. I have been married for 38 years. I have 3 great children that are now adults. Like a lot of people, I've gone through health issues, challenges, emotional issues. Believe it or not, Alex, I used to have an anger issue. To make a long story short, I had an aunt who died of cancer, so this motivated me early on when I was a teenager to get into the medical field. And even though I did not become a doctor and I was a pre-med student, it was because I wanted to help people. I saw my aunt suffer with cancer and was just in total agony, would scream in pain, and I thought, this is crazy. I watched what it did to her children and how it affected them emotionally. Later on, even though I didn't become a doctor, I got a degree in biology because I was so fascinated with the body and how it worked. What I didn't like was chemistry. I think it was an early sign that I was not going to be able to help people with better living through chemistry. Therefore, I did not become a doctor. I did major in biology and then minored in environmental studies. And then after I graduated from college, I was in the Army as an officer. And very early on in my career, my dad, who had retired from the Air Force, had gone in the hospital. And unfortunately, the doctors made a mistake and put him in a coma.
Wow.
And they lied about it and covered it up. And my father eventually died from this. And so I had so much anger because this was at a military hospital. They were Army doctors. They lied. They covered up the records. Some of the personnel on the staff mentioned things to me and said that they made a mistake. They just wouldn't admit it.
Mm-hmm.
So as an officer and as you know, the son of my father, this, and just, you know, such a huge role model for me, this was a major setback, and I just developed so much anger. So anger and then stress in the corporate world snowballed, and even though I thought I knew about health and biology and living like healthier than most people, but still eating more of the standard American diet than I should have, I had some health issues and gained some weight. And as you mentioned, I had an epiphany. In 1995, I went to a seminar, a 10-day seminar, and I learned some information from some of the best speakers in the world. Tony Robbins was a speaker, Deepak Chopra, this guy named Jack Tips, who was a chiropractor from Austin, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and Stu Middleman, and all these great people were sharing information. There was Dr. Duesberg from California, who was an expert on viruses and immunology, and all these speakers talked about how important it was to focus on your body, your mind, and your spirit. And so this was kind of the epiphany that the body, mind, spirit, if any one area is out of balance, it's going to lead to imbalance in your health and your well-being and your happiness. So this was an epiphany in so many ways, because what they said rocked the boat. Some of my foundational beliefs about vaccinations, about nutrition, about lifestyle, about exercise, because I had already started developing some aches and pains, some lower back problems, some hip problems, some knee problem, and I just explained it away as, okay, these are injuries from the Army. I hurt my leg in a parachute jump, and I thought I was healthier than I was, and they did live blood analysis. So the point being is, one seminar, whether it's a live seminar, whether it's a webinar like the Natural Health Summit that you did, one speaker, it could just be today's event, this EFT, if you're open and receptive,
Mm-hmm.
it's like everything can shift. And at that seminar in Hawaii, everything shifted. As I listened to the speakers and I started applying the routine, we would get up in the morning and exercise with Stu Middleman. When we would jump on a rebounder, we would hydrate, we would do things more alkaline. I'm using terms that a lot of you are familiar with, some of you may not be yet.
Mm-hmm.
But as I started applying these strategies during the seminar, eating differently, thinking, meditating, we had a Qigong type master, we had an Ayurvedic master, and they were doing some gong work and different music work, and it really opened up this awareness, this epiphany of information as I tuned out some of my old beliefs and my old programming. So I just invite the viewers to be open and receptive. I mean, I used to be a doubting Thomas about a lot of things. EFT was one of them. And as I learned to open up and start changing my beliefs, changing some of my programming, as I started hydrating better, you know, a lot of people are blocked emotionally because of their poor nutrition and dehydration.
Mm-hmm.
So the epiphany for me was you had to focus on every area of your life every day. You had to have some time for meditation, for yoga, for exercise, for good nutrition. I used to tell myself I was too busy because I was too focused on the sales world
Right.
and my career, and this is when people get in trouble. So anyways, I didn't learn about EFT at the seminar in 1995, but I did get opened up to great resources and realized that there was a lot of information out there I didn't know and I was hungry for. And so I started following Deepak Chopra and others and tuning into the mind, body, spirit, and stayed in the corporate world until 2000. In 2000, I left the corporate world after 20 years with one company, and this is when I devoted time to figure out how could I be perfectly healthy. I had started getting off of all medicines. I'd stopped medicines, I stopped vaccinations, I even stopped over-the-counter medicine because I had done liver damage with over-the-counter pain medicine that I was taking for headaches. So
Yeah.
as you can see, it was a chain reaction, and I was actually spiraling kind of down, getting worse and worse in some ways. And then all of a sudden, everything shifted. As I got off of all over-the-counter medicines, as I started eating differently, exercising, meditating, doing yoga, everything started to shift. And so in 2000, I started running marathons. And this is when I got really excited, because I'd gone from hip problem and back problem and knee problem to now being more healthy and fit than I was when I was in high school and college.
Yeah.
I weighed the same, and yet I could run long distances. And I was training, and sometimes I was running as much as 40 and 50 miles in a week before the marathon, getting ready. So this was like phenomenal. I had all this energy, and it was a result of a lot of different people. One of them that changed my life was David Wolf, one of the speakers you had at Natural Health Summit, as he talked to me about raw foods.
Mm-hmm.
So this, all was coming together. And then in 2000, an amazing thing happened. Another epiphany in my life was 3 introductions to EFT. They say when something happens 3 times, pay attention.
Right.
I had a friend who was a massage therapist, and we were doing some things together at an event where we had to do some shopping for healthy food, and she would do this. And I would say, Dawn, what are you doing? And she says, well, I'm just tapping into my memory. And she could tap in 30, 40 items that we needed to shop for at the store, and she'd remember them. She'd just recall and tap, and I'd say, wow, that's pretty cool. I had another friend, Mimi, at an event in Dallas, and Mimi and I were doing some things, and we had ducked under a door, and Mimi didn't duck far enough, and she hit her forehead and cut it open, and she was bleeding and in pain. And next thing I know, she's tapping and going, I can't believe I did that stupid thing. I can't believe I walked into that door, and I can't believe I'm bleeding, and am I going to have a scar? And she was all anxious, but she's talking and tapping. And I'm saying, Mimi, what are you doing? She says, well, I'm doing this tapping thing. And I went, wow, I got to learn more about that, because next thing I know, she's laughing. She got blood on her face, and she's laughing. And then I'm laughing, and I'm thinking, this is pretty crazy. So the third time I was introduced to tapping, I was at another Robbins event, and one of my friends, Lori, introduced me to a guy who starts talking about this tapping that he's learning. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got to find out more about this tapping, because I've had 3 great opportunities, all in 2000, to hear about different applications. And so this guy was telling me about it, and he said, yeah, I have these videos. I've done this training online with the videos. He said, would you like the videos? And I said, well, tell me more, because I'm doubting Thomas, and I'm thinking, well, it sounds pretty cool, but is it worth buying these videos? And he shared some things. I said, okay, I'll buy your VHS. And this tells you how long ago it was. Back in 2000, Gary's training was on VHS. So I bought the whole box.
Uh-huh.
The guy didn't have it with him, but he mailed it to me.
Yeah.
So this box of VHS tape shows up, and I'm thinking, holy smokes, there is at least 80 or so hours of content, because I believe there were about 30 videos, and they were 3 to 4 hours each, the most you could get on a VHS.
Right.
So I was a little bit skeptical, but I watched these videos by Gary Craig. Gary Craig is the founder of EFT. Gary Craig is an amazing man. He created these learning videos. He did live events. So Gary had learned about tapping from another man who was a psychologist named Roger Callahan. Roger Callahan did some tapping, and Gary said, wow, he learned it. He spent a lot of money to learn it, and he trained with Roger Callahan, and there were all these different acupressure points and these very complex algorithms of doing the tapping. Well, Gary said, how can I take this to the masses? A great question, and make it simple. So Gary came up with a basic recipe, if you will, of tapping points, whereas if you tap these points, it would help just about any issue that would come up. So I liked what Gary had done, in the fact that Gary had condensed it and compressed it into a simple recipe that anybody could follow.
Yeah.
A young child, a student, a parent, a senior citizen, anybody could follow this simple recipe of the tapping points, and he had these educational videos, and I watched him, and it was amazing. One person after another would have a fear or a pain or an anxiety, an eating issue, phobia, and Gary would help them. Well, Gary got to this one point where he's talking about working with veterans, and he had worked with a group of veterans in San Francisco, and he talked about how he helped these veterans who had PTSD, and drug therapy and group therapy, nothing had helped them, and some of them were still suffering 20 and 25 years later. Nightmares and major stress, and some of them were disabled, they couldn't work. And this really hit home because my father was disabled because of PTSD in the military. He started his Air Force career in Korea. He ended his Air Force career in Vietnam. So at a young age, he was in a war. Here he was, a family man with 3 kids back in the States, and he's in Vietnam. And I think all of this trauma, as well as a lot of things that happened when he was in the military, he used to be one of the guys that were in the planes. They call them in the United States, they call them hurricane chasers. In the Pacific, when we lived in Japan, they were typhoon chasers, and they used to actually, the plane would fly inside the hurricane or the typhoon, and you're talking about immense pressure and fear and concern for your own safety. So I think a lot of things happened, and he had PTSD, and he was in a VA hospital, and they actually did shock therapy. So imagine,
wow.
I was in high school, and he asked me to stay in our hometown, not leave home and go away to college. Actually, this was still in high school, but he had asked me that summer to stay home and not go away because he was going in the hospital, and they actually did shock therapy. So again, this was another reason I had some issues, because I knew how traumatic that was, and having his PTSD and his issues, all this becomes a part of you because you're a 50% of your father and 50% of your mother, so their issues indirectly, and I believe directly through the DNA, become your issues. So I was ready, but I was skeptical about EFT, and when I heard that Gary was going to help these veterans, and I was going to watch the video, I thought, okay, I'm going to watch this, I'm going to be open, and if he can help those people, I'm going to learn EFT, I'm going to master EFT, and I'm going to teach it around the world. And by the end of the video, I was convinced Gary had stumbled upon one of the most amazing healing modalities possible in the world, because a person using this process could heal themselves. And I watched Gary do this video where he worked with these guys that had been in the war, and their buddies had died, and they were still having nightmares 25 years later. And in one afternoon in this VA hospital, he was able to help resolve their issues. And these guys were telling the stories. And later Gary did a documentary with some veterans from Vietnam and from Iraq. And I actually met one of the Marine veterans here in Houston. And this guy said EFT saved his life because he was going downhill, alcohol, drugs, violence. He was just on a destructive path. And his mom heard about EFT and said, I've got to do something for my son because he's in big trouble. And he was skeptical. He did it. So again, these are all stories about how people were helped. So if it can help something as intense as PTSD, some of the worst issues in the world where these guys have seen immense violence and trauma, I know it can help anybody with anything else. And I've helped people around the world through seminars, through events where I've been a trainer. I've helped teams of people using tapping on acupressure points. It became very reinforcing for me over time as I was learning it in 2000, studying the videos. I started, over the next couple of years, hearing other people talking about tapping, people that I respected well. Tony Robbins talked about tapping and actually shared it with the audience at several of his events. I actually introduced Deepak Chopra to Gary Craig, and Deepak interviewed Gary, and later Deepak Chopra allowed himself to be one of the not sponsors, but promoters, if you will, or endorsers of EFT. There was Candace Perth, Norman Shealy, and then Deepak Chopra put his picture and his endorsement and wrote some comments, and he interviewed Gary Craig because he said, this is absolutely amazing. And then over the years, other people, Joseph Mercola, started talking about EFT, and he put it on his website. And then later, other people, just this thing snowballed. Jack Canfield has promoted EFT. So a lot of great people are now sharing around the world. And we all owe a gratitude to Gary Craig and his daughter, Tina Craig, because Gary has trained practitioners around the world. I went to one of Gary's trainings in Springfield, Missouri. And so back to the history of EFT, Gary learned it from Roger Callahan, the psychologist, but at the live event in Missouri, the guy that was sponsoring the event with Gary Craig was a Qigong master, and he said EFT goes back 5,000 years to ancient traditional Chinese medicine where they knew about acupressure points and acupuncture.
Right.
So a lot of people watching this hangout will know about acupuncture and how powerful it is. What I love about EFT is the fact that it uses acupressure points, but unlike acupuncture, there are no needles.
Right.
You can do it anytime in any place on yourself. Now, I like to be very loyal and true to Gary Craig and show you exactly the way I learned it from Gary Craig. When I differentiate between what I do and Gary, I'll mention that. And there's a couple things I do differently from Gary Craig. Gary Craig would actually tap on some of the participants that he was working on. I do not tap on anybody. The reason I love EFT is it's an empowerment tool where I can teach people how to EFT. I will tap on myself, and they can mirror me and tap on themselves. So that's one difference. He would actually tap on people. I don't. I want people to learn how to tap on themselves so that they are empowered to do this. And that's why I think while acupressure is great, or acupuncture is great, acupressure, I believe, may be better because you can do it anytime, any place, on yourself. You don't have to worry about needles, and you can instantly change how you're feeling about upsetting emotions.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about the background. So Gary Craig, there were people before Gary Craig. There are a lot of people that do different forms of tapping. There's a whole myriad of tapping. It falls under the category of energy psychology. So there are different strategies for doing the tapping. So they use the general concept of activating these acupressure points. So over the years, I kept doing EFT. I shared it with more and more people. I went from doing individual sessions where I'd work with one person to then I'd start doing some relationship work with couples, and I would have the couples tap, or I'd have the entire family tap. I got to the point I was having entire groups tap. When I'd be at an event, I was doing a financial mastery event where I was a trainer, and a lot of the people on my team were kind of stressed out. We were doing a lot of financial information and stocks and options and puts and calls, and it was confusing. So every morning I would have my team taps. I would have 50, 60 people tapping, and I would notice how it would reduce their stress and anxiety during the event. And I would see them during the day when they were getting a little stressful. They would start tapping, and it would reduce where they'd be more comfortable and relaxed, and they could receive more information. Right. So that's when I realized it was great for students. And so I had all these different references for why tapping would help anybody with any issue, no matter how severe. And in my role as a coach and trainer, I've worked with people that have been sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused, people that have been in car accidents, people that have been through divorce, people that have been through war. I've worked with wounded warriors. So I have literally thousands of references that no matter what issue someone is dealing with, I know EFT will work. And we have a saying, try it on anything and try it on everything. And people are getting results. The only time people don't get results is if they don't stick with it, they're not consistent. I like to actually give homework. So I encourage people to do tapping, and I'll tell you a little bit more later as to the type of homework I give.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
So over the years, I've done seminars where I've taught EFT in Australia, in the U.S., in many cities in Europe, and have helped people get phenomenal results very quickly. I mean, literally, people have turned around emotional issues that have been haunting them for decades, and sometimes in as quick as 5 minutes, sometimes in a little bit more. But typically, you know, some ongoing tapping, they will get results that they can measure. That's one of the things about EFT. It's not me judging that they're getting better.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key distinctions with EFT is to let them identify on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being neutral and 10 being very intense where they're ready to cry. They get to determine where they're at emotionally.
Right.
And then they get to calibrate before and after they do EFT how they're feeling. So they actually see the results because they can see how they feel in their body, their throat, their lungs, their stomach, their head, the anxiety. So it's something that is so absolutely amazing. I get so excited talking about it. So again, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thank all of our viewers for hanging in there to hear the background. I think it's important to know that the person is passionate, they're knowledgeable, they've used the technique on themselves, which I have. I use the tapping every day. First of all, I tap with every client, and because I hear a lot of people's stress and trauma, I hear about abuse, you know, it could be very tough on me. And as you know, a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists get stressed out and have to take medication because of what they hear. It affects them. And so I use EFT to protect myself, and I use EFT every day. And at the end of the day, before I go to sleep, I do a round of tapping to clear out anything negative that I heard, that I saw, that I felt during the day, because I'm like everybody else. I have things that push my button and pull up stress or limiting beliefs from the past or unresolved issues from childhood. You know, people push your buttons, your spouse pushes your buttons, your kids push your buttons, people that you work with, family in particular, whether it's your own family, wife, spouse, children, or your siblings and parents. We get our buttons pushed, so EFT helps me. So what I thought, Alex, if it's okay with you, I'd like to give a little bit about, now that I've talked about on a broad scale the background of EFT and my experience and how it's worked, I'd like to kind of dive a little deep and go into the specifics of the beliefs about why we have these issues and how EFT addresses them, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Just before you do that, I just want to mention something that I was also very skeptical about the therapy, especially when you have someone that tells you, you know, it works for everything. It raises just some skepticism. And here's a statistics that kind of may explain why EFT can be so beneficial for so many different things. And that is that the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, says that 90 or 95% of diseases have an emotional component. Right? And most of the time that emotional component is left unaddressed, and therefore the disease is not properly healed. And because so many different diseases have an emotional component, it's so important to learn ways and techniques to be able to deal with these emotions. Now, one of our challenges in our modern society is that we don't get taught how to deal with emotions. Right? There's no class in high school or in college that tells you if you get angry, then you should be doing this, or if you get depressed, then you should be doing that, and get over it more quickly. And when we don't, these emotions get stored in our subconscious and keep affecting us on a physical level as well for the rest of our lives. And there's some clear research that shows how an emotion or a thought creates specific physiological changes inside our cells. And that information can get stored in those cells and keep having a negative effect, if it was a harmful emotion, for many years. And I believe it's because of that, and because most diseases, more than 90% of diseases, have an emotional component, that a technique like emotional freedom technique, EFT, can help with so many different conditions. So I just wanted to add that in there before we keep going. And now I'd be happy for you, Michael, to give us a demonstration of how this works.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Like you, as I did reading and research, I found numerous doctors. Pediatricians have released information saying that a lot of the issues they deal with are emotionally related. There's a famous orthopedic back surgeon, I believe out of New York, a guy named Dr. John Sarno, and he did a lot of back surgery, and he wrote a book that I have on my bookshelf behind me, and he talked about how he determined a lot of the back problems were really emotional problems.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention it, but my dad went into the hospital for back surgery. I think it was a result of all of the PTSD and the stress he was under. He did a lot of traveling, what we call temporary duty. He was away from the family. As I said, he was flying through hurricanes, working on jets so that if somebody made a mistake, somebody could die.
Yeah.
He had his own emotional issues from childhood, from his father, and his father was alcoholic. So again, there's a lot of stuff that, you know, adds up over time. But John Sarno said that he believed most back problems were emotional issues. And Louise Hay talks about back issues are a structural, while they appear to be a structural issue, are really a support issue.
Mm-hmm.
That people who have back problems, they don't feel supported. It could be at work, they don't feel supported in their family. So you're right, the emotions show up in your body, and that's what we talk about in EFT. Gary talks about that this emotional energy is a blockage. Pain, anxiety, stress, frustration, anger, fear, it gets stuck in your body. So it locks up what we call the energy meridians. Mm-hmm. The meridians run from your feet through all the organs and glands in your body to the top of your head to your hands, and that's where reflexology comes in. Is they know that these acupressure points in the hands and feet can be massaged and manipulated, and it can free up the energy.
Right.
So this emotional blockage, because most people, instead of releasing their emotions, hold it in. We're taught to, you know, bite your tongue. A parent is yelling at you, and the kid's told not to talk back. So we are conditioned and trained to hold this negative emotion in. We hold it in our stomach. Many times people are, you know, repressive and repressed by other individuals. They're bullied, which is a big issue in school today, and we're going to talk about how EFT can help. But people are verbally abused, emotionally abused, they're bullied, they're manipulated, and they're conditioned and programmed by the parents and coaches and teachers and trainers and leaders, and the parents on the kids' soccer team are yelling. And so this gets into people's inside, and it gets locked into their emotions. And Gary talks about it's like if the batteries are in reverse in your remote for the TV, it's not going to work. And it's like a disruption. He calls it a zzz, where there's a short in your system. So I like to use the analogy, think of the circuit breaker for your house. Mm-hmm. When you've got a power surge or something is wrong in one area, the circuit breaker may flip. And while the rest of the house may function fine, that one circuit breaker could shut down one part of your house. And it could be your health, it could be your happiness. Mm-hmm. So EFT is a way to tap on acupressure points as you're verbalizing and thinking about what happens. So it's the opposite of repressing it. You're actually getting it out of your body, and you're tapping. And what this does is it resets the circuit breaker to free up the energy, the flow of energy and information through the body, and get it outside the body where it won't hurt you. You know, that's why they say go hug a tree when you're stressed out, or go ground yourself on the earth, because you want to disseminate that negative energy out and pull in the positive, healthy energy into your body. So EFT, a principle that's essential people get, is we all have these circuit breakers that are going on and off all the time. Sometimes they will reset themselves, but many times the really tough issues, what we call the core issues, need you to reset them. And you have to go into a very specific, and I've had people tell me, they try to tell me that EFT doesn't work. Yeah. I had one woman in particular said, look, I tried EFT with an EFT practitioner and it didn't work. I said, well, tell me about it. And as she told me about it, I saw some specifics as to why it didn't work. What I saw and what people will want to learn about EFT is you want to be very specific. So I invite people to think of a very specific time and place when something occurred. It could be a car accident, or a kid fell off of his bicycle, or a couple were having a major argument, you know, something that caused some emotional pain, maybe some physical pain. But then I have them think of, what did they see, what did they hear, what did they feel? And then they identify the emotion. So let's say somebody is feeling anger. The parent was yelling at them, the parent's angry, so they're role modeling the parent being angry, and then they're angry. They got caught doing something, and the parent's yelling at them, they're yelling back, and then the parent spanks them, so now they're really angry and hurt. And so they may have multiple emotions. I may ask them, well, which one is more intense, the anger or the hurt? And so once they identify the emotion and they think of the specific time, then they calibrate on a scale of 0 to 10, where are they? 0 is neutral. 10 is very intense, they're ready to cry. Because we want to get them somewhat associated to the situation so that they bring up some of the same emotions. And then I ask them, where specifically is this affecting you? Some people may have a headache. Some people may feel pressure behind the eyes or pressure in the temples. Some people get a very tight, constricted throat. Other people get that tense feeling in the pit of their stomach. And this is important. And I believe one of the key benefits that I have found combining EFT and neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, is I'm really tuned into the specifics of the emotions, the visual, the auditory, the kinesthetic, that go into an emotion, because we have a state of being based on a lot of different factors. And so even with the visual, I may say, is it moving? Is it up close? Is it far away? Is it loud? For the auditory. And so we identify the specifics, and then what we would do is, once we've identified the specific emotion, we do what we call technique to avoid psychological reversal. So the first thing you do is you take 2 fingers, you go into what they call the sore spot, and you massage that, and they might say, you know, even though my dad was yelling at me and I got angry, and then he took out the belt and spanked me and I was really angry, you know, even though I was angry, I deeply and completely accept myself, appreciate myself, and maybe love myself. There's 3 different words, and you can, depending on what they're comfortable with, you have them massage the sore spot, which is below the collarbone here, and there's like a tender area, kind of not quite into the armpit, but people can feel it, and they'll actually say, oh yeah, it's a little sore. I say, well yeah, that's why they call it the sore spot. So you're massaging the sore spot, and you have them do that 3 times. Even though I felt this anger at my dad, I deeply and completely love and accept and appreciate myself. So what you're doing is you're identifying the emotion, anger. You're thinking about that specific time in your head. You're kind of feeling it in your body. You're feeling the anger, and you feel what it was like when you got the belt. So you feel that pain. But now you're doing the one thing that everybody needs. This is where, you know, just even beginning the process, I think, is so helpful in healing. You're giving yourself appreciation, acceptance, and love. The feeling we all crave and we don't get enough of. And so after you do that 3 times, and this is because some people are mismatchers and some people actually get a lot of benefit from telling their sad story over and over again. And I want to get people off of telling the sad story so that they start focusing on a solution. And then I would have them tap on the anger. So we would tap on the crown point. So anger, anger, anger. Then we would tap on the eyebrow point, which is right here, the end of the eyebrow to the side of the nose. And then we would tap on the temple, which is this bony spot, not further back, but right on the bony spot. Then right underneath the eye, that's under the eye point.
Yeah.
The nose point, the chin point, which is below the bottom lip. And then the collarbone point, which is your collarbone are these 2 bony areas. So you want to drop down and out, and then you tap on that. And then you tap under the arm. Now, some people might be asking, do I tap with 1 hand? I see you tapping with 2 hands. It doesn't matter if you're left-handed, right-handed, if you want to do both hands. It doesn't matter. It works. So you can tap under the arm. So we're about 4 inches underneath the armpit. And then we're going to tap on the hand. So we tap on the side of the thumbnail, the side of the first finger, the next finger. We skip the ring finger and go to the pinky finger. And then we go to what's called the karate chop point. Now, the recipe, Gary's recipe starts with the eyebrow point and goes through the karate chop point. I just want you to know that I added the crown chakra, which is very powerful for a lot of reasons. And I've seen Gary do it occasionally, but not regularly. But one thing I like to do is after the hand point, I'll also use visual. So I'll have somebody look up at 12 o'clock and then go around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then back 12, 11, 8, 10, 9, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then I'll have them hum, maybe row your boat, while they're tapping on the karate chop point. Maybe then I'll have them count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'll have them count in another language. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. One thing I like to do is at the very end, Gary would kind of go from there and ask them some questions. I would always have them hit their wrists together. There are hundreds of acupressure points in the wrist. So I have people hit those wrists together and fire off all those acupressure points. Also, this becomes an anchor. As you do EFT over and over and over and over again, it gets anchored into your body. So sometimes you might be in a business meeting, and it may not be to your best interest or too cool to start tapping all over. But you could put your hands together underneath the desk, and right now I am tapping my wrists together and firing off all those acupressure points that I've been tapping. So anchoring is a term we use in NLP. It's a very powerful tool, and everybody is anchored. We're anchored to music. We're anchored to faces. We're anchored to a lot of things. And some people have, there's positive anchoring, and then there's negative anchoring, where you can have something where you're anchored and it triggers negative emotions. And this is what throws a lot of people off, is they've become anchored into negative emotions. They go into a negative state. As soon as they start talking about something, they just go down and down, and they don't know how to get out of it. So EFT will help you get out, but over time, the more times you do EFT, and the more times you then anchor it in by hitting your wrist together and firing off all those acupressure points, you're locking in your body. So let me give you a quick example of the homework I give. I encourage people to tap before every meal, because a lot of times people have things that have happened, and what people don't realize is you can be eating healthy food, but if you're stressed, that healthy food will not process. And this is part of my nutritional background, my Ayurvedic background. The state of being that you are in, the state of the food, the people who prepared it, the energy, the environment, all affects you. So if you're eating healthy food, but you're stressed and negative, you're rushing, you're not chewing up your food, you're worried, you're anxious, you'll actually process that food in a more negative way, and it may not be healthy. So I have people tap before they eat, and then, as I mentioned, I tap before I go to bed, and I recommend people tap before they go to bed. This way they tap with any issue that's come up before they eat, so then they're more relaxed. They won't overeat. They'll slow down. And this will actually help people lose weight and not do as much stress eating because they're releasing those emotions that may actually cause them to eat when they're not really that hungry, because it's the stress, that feeling in the pit of your stomach, the stress and anxiety at work causes people to go have coffee, to go have sweets, junk food, or then overeat at lunch.
Right.
So as you tap during the day and then you tap at night, you'll have a better sleep, you'll process the information, and then the next day, I believe, will go better, and then you're going to tap as new things pop up. But the more you do it, the more beneficial it gets. As I said, I've now been tapping since 2000, which makes it almost 14 years, and I'm just amazed at all the things that keep popping up, different emotions, different memories. So that's what EFT looks like. Let me give you some examples of some setup phrases and some situations specifically so that you can relate and see ways to apply it. So I want to talk about one young man that I talked about on the interview with you. He was, I believe, 4.5 years old at the time. His mother contacted me because in kindergarten he was bullying other children, pushing them down, and very mean. And in particular, he was bullying the girls. So the teacher and the principal of the kindergarten called the mom and said, your child has some sort of emotional issue, and you need to get him some professional help and get him on drugs, or we're kicking him out of kindergarten. And the mother was very distraught, and she was a single mom, and she came to me and said, I don't know if you can help. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I can help. This sounds, I'd never at that point worked with someone this young. This was my first youngster, if you will, a 4.5-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, will they understand? Are they going to do it? So I went to their house, and I tapped with the mother and the son. And it was so traumatic for the son, he couldn't even talk and tell me what happened. I said, no problem. You don't even have to talk. Just kind of relay the feelings. So he started telling a story as if he was watching a video. It was so intense, bringing up these memories, that he had to talk like he was watching a movie. And he said the man in the movie was doing bad things. The man in the movie was hurting people, and that hurt me to watch it. Well, it turned out he was talking about his father. His father had been physically and emotionally abusive to the mother while he was in utero. So while he was developing, the mother was being physically abused by the father. She felt isolated and alone. She'd come from another country to the United States, and the husband was abusing her, but there was nothing she could do. And she came from a culture where the husband was in this, powerful, controlling position, and the wives were a little bit more subservient. So she just put up with it, and he continued to abuse her. And then he abused the mother in front of the son when the son was growing up, and occasionally he abused the son. So this little boy grows up with abuse of himself. He sees his mother being abused, so he starts abusing little girls in kindergarten. We start tapping. He tells a story, and every time he talks about the anger or the fear, we have him tap, and he says the word, fear, 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 fear. So he's tapping. As he's talking, I have him tapping the entire time. So he's talking, but he's getting it out of his body. This has been suppressed now since before birth. His mother's, hormones, cortisol, the stress was programmed right into him. So he's tapping and getting it out. And even though he's the mother's got tears running down her face because she realizes that she contributed. So she's anxious because she realizes she contributed by staying in the marriage. She contributed to what happened to her son. So now she feels responsible. She feels guilty. So now I'm tapping on both. I'm tapping on me, listening to this sad story, and they're tapping on themselves. The boy is tapping because he can follow me. The mother's tapping on her guilt. The son is tapping on the hurt, the sadness, the anger. So we go through all the emotions. He tunes into where he feels it. He feels it in his stomach. He feels it in his bottom where his dad spanked him. He feels it in his face where his dad hit him and hit his mom. The mother felt it in her face. So even though she divorced the husband early on, it had still already been programmed into the child. And this is what people may want to understand, is all this is programmed into your body before you're age 7. Experiences from early in life stay with you the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So the great thing about this was I gave them homework. They were to tap before they ate, and they would tap. When she would take them to kindergarten, they would tap. Well, what was amazing is this was a Sunday we did the session, and I'll never forget it because it was a holiday. It was 4th of July. We tapped on Monday when she took them to kindergarten. She's just worried as can be, is this going to work? She's doubting, but she was tapping all the way to kindergarten. And a couple of days later in the week, she gets a call, and she thinks, oh my gosh, they're calling, they're going to kick him out of school. She's anxious, so she's tapping on herself because she's so nervous about this call. And the principal calls and says, wow, what kind of medication did the doctors put your son on? Because he changed instantly. As soon as he came back to school, he was a different boy.
Yeah.
What kind of medication did they put him on? She said, what do you mean? She said, well, he behaved so well. In fact, there's this really weird thing. This little girl fell in the playground, and he helped pick her up. And he was dusting off, and he was telling her to do this weird thing. And he was touching his face, and these, points on his face. And next thing you know, the little girl's laughing. She's not crying, So what kind of medication, what kind of happy pill did they give him? And she just said, well, I'd like to share it with you sometime, but I'm just glad. She was just so happy, and they just kept tapping. So this young man went from being a problem child, getting ready to get kicked out of kindergarten, to a couple years later when I checked in with him, he was an honor student. He was tops in math, science, and he was one of the champions on the chess team. Now, he did have a relapse several years later. He was about 8 or 9 years old. He had a relapse. Mm-hmm. And so the mother called me back, and it was because the father had come back into his life. The father had searched him out and come back into his life, and so being around the father brought up a lot of the memories. Right. As soon as we tapped on it again, he got it out of his body, got back to where he needed to be, and it's an amazing happily ever after story. Another story with students, and I like to talk about students because we're all kids really at heart. We're all adults in our body, but in our heart, inside, in our spirit, our soul, we're really kids. And we're still trying to resolve our childhood issues. When I worked in a high school, I had a lot of students who had issues. Divorced parents, major issues. So divorce almost automatically has emotional issues locked in or not resolved, and tapping will help. Even when I have people tell me, Michael, I've dealt with that. I forgave my father. I forgave my mother, or whatever. It's not as true as they think. It's more in the body than they realize. And you can see it as soon as you talk to them for a while, and a few buttons get pushed. Mm-hmm. It's pretty easy to identify they haven't gotten it out of their body as much as they think. So I helped high school students who had been in pain of divorce. One young woman, her father had been in prison, and this was a major impact. It was affecting her grades. A lot of relationship issues. And every student I got up in this class, and we would tap, and we even had a group of people tapping, they would all get immediate results. It would go down from a 9 or a 10 to an 8 or a 6. So you just keep seeing when it gets intense, they tap, and they talk about it, and it goes down, and you check in. Okay, are you breathing? Mm-hmm. Are you hydrated? By the way, some people, when they say tapping has not worked, it's because they're not hydrated. So these are basic health and nutrition things you and I know. But a lot of people forget, if you're in a negative state, you have to check into your body. Are you hydrated? Are you feeling some anxiety someplace? Are you breathing? I get excited, so I start talking a lot, so I have to slow down and relax, sit back, and take a deep breath. Because if you're low on oxygen, dehydrated, anxious, this affects your state. So you got to look at your state, your physiology. Then you have to look at your psychology, your thinking. Where are you feeling it? What are you feeling? Identify a specific emotion. Mm-hmm. Another good example, I worked with a doctor who was an emergency room doctor. So again, for some of the doubting psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors out there, this doctor was an ER doctor, and he'd seen a lot of trauma. And he had called me up and said, look, I'm getting ready to quit. I can't take any more. And specifically, he was ready to quit because an infant had been abused and brought into the ER room, and the infant died, and he felt responsible. But just seeing that traumatized him, and he says, I'm getting ready to quit. I can't be an ER doctor anymore. I may even just quit being a doctor altogether. Yeah. And I said, look, just give it a try. And in a 3-hour session, we identified where it started, which was some of his childhood issues that over time had manifest and steamrolled, and we call it stacking. These things had stacked to the point he just, too many circuit breakers had gone off. So we had to start flipping the circuit breakers from his childhood, from his teen years, from his medical school days to the event. So we did timeline therapy and went back to different points, identified the different issues, and after 3 hours, he felt like a new man. He went and shared it with his girlfriend who had migraine headaches. And he helped her get rid of a migraine headache so quickly, and he was like, wow. And he realized he was feeling better. And as an ER doctor, he said, you know, what if I start trying this with some of the nurses and some of the doctors and myself when I get stressed out in the ER room? Mm-hmm. So he did, and then eventually he felt comfortable enough to start sharing it with people that would come into the ER room that were having anxiety attacks, panic attacks. They were in shock. He would treat the physical issue, but he would really deal with the emotional issue. He started getting results. This guy actually did some videos and started training, and he is still an ER doctor the last time I checked in with him, and he's teaching EFT to lots of people and helping people in the ER room. So we could go on and on. I have examples of working with wounded warriors, some Marines in San Jose, California. These guys have been going through group therapy and drug therapy, and this one, there were about 14 or 15 vets, all Marines. Some of them were amputees, so they saw a lot of trauma, physical trauma, the emotional trauma, you know, death. And a couple of them had their wives with them. And even though they told me they were doubting Thomas and skeptical, I said, look, you know, I understand that. And I was too. And I said, just, it's like anything else. Give it a try. You know, try it on anything and everything. They did. I had one brave sergeant who was the first one. And even when he did it and got results, and he relived the story, I think his was in Afghanistan, where a man died right in front of him, one of his troops.
Wow.
Even when he did it and he got immediate results, and we did some very specific language patterns, and we figured out where it was in his body, even when he got results within 15 minutes, more results than he'd gotten in years of the therapy, even the other veterans sitting right there, the other Marines, didn't think it was true. They thought, okay, he's kind of just faking it to help Michael out. But one after another of these guys shared their experience and got results, so that at the end of a 3-hour session, one of the wives came to me just crying with tears of joy, saying, you know what, you did more for my husband in 3 hours than 2 years of therapy and the 20 different medications they've put him on, which have made him worse. I mean, he was getting violent. The police had been called in because he would just go crazy because of the side effects of the medication. So again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a pharmacist. So I'm not telling people to stop taking their medications. I'm not telling anybody at all. I'm just saying learn to use health modalities, healthy eating, and EFT. And this one guy ultimately got off his medication. He's now an amazing testimonial. We've kept in touch. Matt called me recently, and he's now out of the Marines, working with a government contract with the Navy, and he was actually sharing with somebody who was heavily involved with the American with Disabilities Act, one of the founders, showing him EFT and how beneficial it is for anybody and everything. So I want to stop and see if you have any questions, Alex. We're right at the 1 hour mark. I have a couple of things to wrap up, but do you have any questions at this point? Or do you see any questions in the chat box?
You have some amazing success stories, and every time I hear about this, it's like, this is such a powerful technique. One of the questions that came up to me as you were talking was, you mentioned some people get results after just 5 minutes of doing this, and then with these guys from the military, you were working for 3 hours. You personally have done EFT for 14 years now. How long does this take? I mean, is this something that anybody can do, or do we have to invest hours every single day doing this? How fast do people get results? Because, you know, we're all busy, have crazy busy lives, some of us, and just trying to fit in one more thing, if it takes more than 5 minutes, may not be possible. So what is your experience with that, and what determines how long it takes for someone to get results?
That's a great question. And let me talk about how quick results and how long results can take. Part of it has to do with how specific you are on the event that you're tapping on. If you can really tune into it, the emotions, if you're very clear about the time it happened, and you really focus in on it, you can get amazing results very quickly. One of the things I want to mention, even though we did a 3-hour session with Marines, each session with an individual Marine might only have gone 10 or 15 minutes. Okay. One of the big things I did not mention was borrowing benefits. EFT is more powerful in a group setting. So in the borrowing benefits, as one Marine was talking about his story, everybody in the group was tapping simultaneously on themselves. So it's like each one of them was borrowing a benefit from the other, and even without wanting to, in their own head, as they're listening to somebody talk about his trauma, you automatically start thinking about your own trauma. So they indirectly were tuning into what he was saying, but their subconscious mind was also thinking about their own situation and going, yes, this is exactly what I need. So as they would tap to support the other person, they would get the benefit. So I was tapping to show them how to do it. The individual I was working with tapped. They would get the benefit because they're touching these acupressure points, and everybody else was tapping, so they got the benefit. So even though it was a 3-hour session, it was really, I had to set it up by talking about my background being in the military so that they felt comfortable sharing, that my dad had PTSD, and I had, this anger issue, so they could open up, feel safe, and so that they could really get in and get specific. I mean, they use very specific language. Now, I also want to mention, Alex, I've worked with people where they either never said a word, they would think about it and tap, or I had one woman who had been physically abused as a young girl. She was from another country, and she told me it was too traumatic to even tell me. So I said, okay, well, just tell me in your language. So she spoke in a language I didn't understand at all, but I could tell by her intensity it was very significant, and she was overweight and had all this trauma and infected 40 years of her life. So she was talking a language I didn't even understand, but I didn't have to. I could tell when she was angry, I could tell when she felt hurt, I could tell when she was sad, and we just kept talking, and she would yell out in her language, but we kept tapping, and I'm tapping with her, and this woman got amazing results. And now I still see her occasionally at events, and she'll come up and give me a big hug. So it doesn't matter if you believe it or not, it works. It doesn't matter if you say it out loud. It doesn't matter if you get all the tapping points right or not. It doesn't matter if you do it with the left hand, the right hand, or both hands. It doesn't matter. If you do it, you will get results, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you do it, the more you believe in it, the more you see it working, and the more you anchor it in. That's why I like to use that anchor point at the end. The more you anchor it in, the easier it gets. So sometimes right now I can just hit that, and it fires it off, and I feel a lot better. Let's go into how quickly you can do it and how you can save time. I'm one of those people, like everybody else, super busy, so I have to multitask. A great way is do the tapping when you have time, but you can even tap when you're driving. So I'll have one hand on the steering wheel, I'll have that wrist, all those acupressure points on my knee or on the steering wheel, and somebody will cut me off and I'll get angry and I'll say something, and then I'll just start tapping. Even though I got angry at that person for cutting me off, I deeply accept myself, appreciate myself, and yeah, I even appreciate them, I guess. They make me drive more careful. And I would be tapping on the steering wheel. You can tap your wrist on your knee, which brings up an interesting story. I worked with a young man that had cerebral palsy. We were at an event in Italy, and his cerebral palsy was so bad he was in a wheelchair, and people had trouble understanding him speak. So I told him, well, look, as you're talking, after we'd done several rounds of tapping, and he talked about the trauma of his birth and how it affected his life and how people just didn't understand how tough it was for him. He was in a wheelchair, and somebody stole his computer. He'd been picked up by the police because they were concerned about him. All this stuff kept affecting him and stacking, but it all went back to his birth. But this young man, when he was tapping, his speech totally changed. And we did a before and after. He would talk, then people would leave and come back, and we would tap, and then as he was talking, he would tap, his speech would actually change. I mentioned on the call with you that I worked with a young man here in Sugar Land who had a stuttering problem, and EFT helped him immediately. We did a session for about an hour, and even though before the session he was stuttering like crazy, we went back to his childhood. His mother and father had divorced. He had been raised by a stepfather, so he had issues with his real biological father. He had issues with his stepfather, and so as we brought that up and he's talking about this, all of a sudden his stuttering disappeared. Absolutely amazing. I've worked with several stutterers, so it doesn't matter what you think, what age you are. I helped my mother who had high blood pressure. Even though she had high blood pressure, it turned out in doing the tapping, we found out she had fallen out of a window at the farmhouse where she lived as a little girl, fallen out of the window, and when she did, she landed on her back and it knocked the wind out of her, and everybody ran out the house and they're going, "Rosie, are you okay? Rosie, can you breathe?" Well, when you get the wind knocked out of you, you can't breathe, and so she's going there, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe."
Right.
So my mom was always a shallow breather, and this would affect her heart rate, and later on in life she had high blood pressure that I didn't know about, and it was going back in time and doing the tapping. So again, there's all these situations where amazing results very quickly, and some people they'll tap with me, and some people will keep doing it, especially couples. If it's with couples or a family or some situation at work where the stuff keeps triggering, you need to keep tapping and go to specific emotions that it brings up. It works for phobias. So you just have to get very specific. That's where you may be able to do it yourself, but you may need somebody to coach you and specifically help you identify all of the different aspects, what we call the core aspects of what's really going on and where it's showing up in your body.
Yeah.
It's just so exciting to see the amazing results that people get very quickly. So once you have done it enough initially and get the anchor points, you can literally do it like my tapping at night before I get in bed, 1 minute.
Okay.
And it's so beneficial because, as I said, it's important for me that I never want to stop doing what I'm doing with nutrition and emotions and health and wellness and families. So I have to make sure that I protect myself and get rid of the negative emotions. And I hear, like I said, a lot of trauma. There's so much abuse. So many women have been abused by men. So many children have been abused by one of the parents. When I did a seminar in Estonia, which used to be behind the Iron Curtain, there was a lot of issues from the war and the occupation and a father who left this young woman. And, this stuff gets, I believe, not only locked in your body, it gets locked in your heart. So that's why I focus a lot on the heart and the spirit. When you can heal the heart, then you can help the head. And that's what the title of this was, heal your heart so that you can, help your head, or get inside and get the stuff out of your body. Stop repressing it, release it, love and support and appreciate yourself. And so that's why that phrase, even though I'm this, that, angry, hurt, I deeply and completely accept myself, I appreciate myself, and I love myself. I just want to throw that in one last time, Alex, because, bullying is a huge issue, self-esteem, self-worth. So many people do not feel good about themselves. Our society has been so tough. The media, the magazines, the fashion industry have done so much to brainwash kids through commercials, how to live their life, how to eat, how to behave, how to look. There's so much pressure on society and on individuals. Our kids are so stressed out at school. I mean, I can't even begin to relate to the people out there, but if you have kids, you know what I'm talking about. The bullying that goes on now, the social bullying on Facebook, and our world has kind of gotten ahead of us with all the technology, and we need to take some time to help ourselves. So people that tell me they're too busy, they don't have time, I say baloney. You have time for EFT. You need it. It will help you in positive ways. You'll be better at work, better in your career, better at sports, better at school, better at learning, better memory, better recall. So look at the positive ways. It'll help the negative issues, but then you can turn on the positive supercharging for peak performance. And the sky's the limit. You know, you have this unlimited potential, and EFT will help you unlock. You've just got to go back and resolve this, and just know and trust, have a little bit of faith, if you will, that stick with it. Sometimes the more you think it's not working, it may actually be working, because you got to prime the pump a little bit and stick with it. And then you too can have an epiphany with EFT, as I and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people around the world have been able to.
Awesome.
Alex, any other questions?
Yeah, well, Michael, that's absolutely amazing. What I'd like to do is just quickly summarize the technique itself one more time. So we're starting with getting clear about the issue at hand, the emotional issue that is creating symptoms. We're going to try and find where in the body this shows up so that we are as clear as possible. And then you're massaging the sore spots, right, below the clavicle, below the collarbone.
Right.
And then you do that tapping sequence. Do you say anything specific during that tapping sequence? Maybe what would be nice is if you could just demonstrate one more time, like a real world example of what you do in like a minute or two, and what you say and what your routine is. Would that be possible?
Absolutely. So I'll go through a quick routine at night. I would tap and say, you know, even though that client shared that horrific story of sexual abuse and physical abuse, and it's really impacted their life, and they've been, you know, sad, I deeply and completely accept myself, appreciate myself. I'm so grateful for the gift of EFT and Gary Craig, and I was able to help that individual, and I'm getting this out of my body. And I just go through all of this. Here was one point I didn't really talk about. Again, all of this, by the way, is on Gary Craig's website. So if you Google Gary Craig, I just want to show you real quickly a couple of things. Gary Craig has an amazing manual. This is my manual. Gary Craig used to give this manual away for free. You would download it on the internet. He now has a book out, so look for Gary Craig's book. And then this is what Gary Craig's, I watched the original VHS, but then I got the DVD version. So this is just one of his EFT sets. So as you can see inside, there are a multitude of DVDs, right? You can see all that. That's just one set. I have a dozen of these. So I literally have 150 or more hours of training by Gary Craig. The guy is amazing, and he'll show you the points. So the manual shows you the points, plus watching the videos, because, again, you want to understand there's one point here where they'll rub, and that's when I'll do the hand. So that affects the visual. And what you're doing is you're doing what we call an NLP, a scramble. So what I'm doing is I'm scrambling that negative. So when that woman told me about the abuse, it was so traumatic for her, but I was picking up on it. My body, because we were in sync, we were in rapport, I'm picking up on her negative energy. So by tapping with her, I'm getting it out of my body at the moment. But at the end of the night, before I went to sleep, I wanted to make sure I got it out of my body. So I would talk about how beneficial it was, how it got it out of her body, how I tapped it out of my body, and then I would just give thanks. I'm so grateful for the things I've learned through my NLP trainer and through Robin's research events and the skill sets that I've picked up there, working with thousands of people around the world, Gary Craig for the EFT, and the people who introduced me to EFT, because, you know, we're all connected. And so I would get out of my body, and then I'd go to sleep, and I'd have a great night's sleep, and I'd wake up the next day ready and eager. So anybody with any issue, no matter what it is, no matter how severe it is, no matter how many times they've thought they've dealt with it, whether you've seen a psychologist or psychiatrist, whether you've been on medications, never give up. My website is michaelmorningstar.com. People can check out my free blog, my free newsletter, website. I have little resources. I'm always talking about EFT. You can search articles, and I give examples. But anybody can make contact, watch this video, check out Gary Craig, contact you, Alex, and the other speakers. There's such a wealth of information, and it doesn't take 100 ideas. It only takes one good idea to totally transform your life. And for me, it was EFT. Well, first it was going to the seminar to get rid of some of the limiting beliefs I had about health and nutrition. Yeah. And that's why the speakers you have are so phenomenal. But then I needed something else, and it was EFT to help me get rid of the anger I'd been holding for a long time. I'd been holding to the anger for decades. Yeah. I had some of my own pain issues because of my injury in the Army, actually multiple injuries. One was a parachute accident. Another was another officer training injured me where I had a major shoulder blade issue for a long time. And so this stuff, you know, comes back to affect you later on, and you get this negative story. So one thing I want to close with, Alex, believe in EFT enough to use it on yourself. But one great thing I tell people, because a lot of people waste time listening to other people's sad stories, and I say, look, just do a quick timeout. When somebody starts to tell you a sad story, so let's say it's a woman talking about her abusive boyfriend, I say, look, do a timeout. Say, I learned this new technique. I want to try it out. When you tell me this story that I've already heard a dozen times, I want you to tap, and they may only tap on one acupressure point, but they tap here or they tap here on the credit shop, or they tap here, and they tell the story about the abusive boyfriend, and you're tapping on yourself because you don't want to take in their negative energy, and you say, look, as soon as you stop tapping, I stop listening to the story. And you get them to agree to that. So now when you're listening to their sad story, they're actually getting some therapy. And right. It's amazing how they'll go, well, I can't keep talking to you. And you might even start laughing, and they're starting laughing. And next thing you know, the whole conversation that would have gone on for an hour stops. And I've had women say this is one of the best things about EFT is it cuts out all that time they waste listening to the same sad stories over and over and over again. Right. And it's amazing because they feel better afterwards. The other person feels better. And that's how you spread the message of EFT. So I would ask everybody to be a good Samaritan and pay it forward. Use EFT for yourself and start sharing it with your children. Try it, use it on everything, and stay with it. Get results, and comment on Natural Health Summit. Comment on michaelmorningstar.com. Let us know what's working, what's not working, and share this hangout, because Alex and I have had a great time. As you can see, I'm so excited I've gone a little bit over time, and I do apologize. And I don't know, I may never connect with you again, I may never see you again. My whole mission and vision in life is to help there be more happy and healthy families. And I know there's so many kids suffering in school and stressed out with bullying and just struggling with themselves and their emotions and their self-esteem. And I also know, working with a lot of adults, that there are still these kids inside that are having issues. So did we wrap up and cover a quick example? That whole thing, the actual doing it takes 1 or 2 minutes, and we all have 1 or 2 minutes for our health and happiness, right?
Right, absolutely. No, I think it's a wonderful technique, and Michael, thank you so much for sharing with us here this wealth of knowledge that you have, because so many people are totally lost when it comes to dealing with non-supportive emotions. So this is a technique that people can use. It's so simple to do, and I know we've talked about a lot here today, and yes, we have gone a little bit over the time that we had initially planned. But Michael, any final word for our audience?
Jim Rome had some famous words, and he would say it's easy to do and it's easy not to do. EFT is emotional freedom technique. I also like to think that the EFT stands for easy, fast, and terrific results. Even if you're a doubting Thomas, like I was, once you see it a little bit more detail, you see Gary Craig in his training, you see him working with veterans, you see the documentary that he did with veterans on PTSD. When you see it work with guys that have been some of the worst trauma in the world, and you see they get rapid results, then just have a little bit of faith, give it a try, and stick with it. It's like anything else. Going to the gym one time is not going to give you magnificent muscles, fitness, and health.
Right.
You have to make time for eating healthy, for exercise on a consistent, regular basis. And I say the same thing is true with EFT. I happen to do EFT, not before every meal now, but a lot of times before I eat I will, and for sure before I go to bed. Mm-hmm. So if at a minimum you will commit for the next 21 days to tap, to get the basic recipe down, the basic formula, go through the points that we shared on this video, this hangout, do that before every meal, before you go to bed, and do that for 21 days, I believe you'll get into a habit, and then all you have to do is fire off that anchor, and I believe you'll see fantastic results. You'll want to start sharing it with people. For me, it's like going to the gym, because I know for myself and most people, it's the emotional issues that drive all of our behavior, all of our great behavior and all of our negative behavior. And we all are looking for ways to improve in our career, our finances, our family, our health, our well-being, our excitement, our ability to support the causes that make us get excited. We all have so many areas of our life we're wanting to focus on. It's the emotions that drive your behavior. So if you've got some limiting beliefs or some negative emotions, setting up a little bit of time every day and multitasking. I'll do tapping when I'm on my rebounder. I'll do tapping when I'm driving. I do tapping with a client, so that's why I'm tapping all the time. And believe me, if you'd seen what I was like 20 or 30 years ago, I was not the best father. I had a lot of anger, and my kids and my wife will tell you I'm like a new person. And people that know me know that I'm pretty wild and crazy, and I've done a lot of crazy things, but at least I'm really reaching my peak potential, my peak performance in many areas, and turning back a lot of the issues that I face and everyone faces. So I know you can do it. I have faith in you. Have a little bit of faith in yourself, and keep tapping.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. That was a wonderful hangout here today. And everybody who is watching this, guys, just give it a try. You've got nothing to lose. This is a natural therapy that you can use. There's no side effects like oftentimes drugs have. And you can get benefits from it that you've only dreamt of before so far. I mean, just imagine the pain, the disease that can be prevented. About 50% of adults will experience severe depression at one point or another in their life. How great would it be to have this tool to overcome it faster?
Yep.
So, guys, again, this is the cutting edge of health. So I'd like to invite you to share what you've learned. Right? Comment on this video. Now, let us know your experience. What have you tried? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Now, share it with your friends. Share it with your family. Plus one, share it on Facebook.
Absolutely.
And our mind is so powerful, and it's just so much more fun when it's working for you instead of against you.
Absolutely. Alex, one more thing. I've got so many exciting stories, but I had one woman who called me, and she was getting ready to do back surgery. And I said, look, just try EFT for a couple of weeks before you do the back surgery. You can always do the back surgery. And like John Sarno said, a lot of the back issues were an emotional issue. It turned out it was her father. And when we tapped for a week, she felt better. She said, look, I'm not going to have the surgery. And to this day, the woman never had the surgery, and she had fallen on ice, slipped on ice, and had a serious spinal injury. So yes, it was a physical injury, but it was the emotional injury that prevented her from healing up.
Yeah.
She did the tapping. She resolved it. She never had the back surgery. She's healthier and happier than she's ever been. She actually promotes EFT. She interviewed me. I gave a chapter. I wrote a chapter for her book on coaching. So I just want to invite people, even physical pain, which I didn't address enough. I worked with a young man that had a burn. These things can be resolved with EFT. So like Alex said, thank you. First of all, thank you to Alex for allowing me to be on the Natural Health Summit and help us spread the message. Yes, it helps us, but it'll also help others find this message by plussing below, by sharing on Facebook and other social medias, but send people back. Get them on to Google Plus and get them on to Hangouts. This is very exciting technology. And for our first one, I'm just super pumped up. As you can tell, Alex, I can't stop talking. I got so much excitement going on. But it's about helping people. That's what drives me. That's my passion in life, is to help families. So share this message. Help us get it out to a lot of people. Again, thank you very much. Namaste.
Awesome. Well, Michael, thank you again. And I'm very happy about this very first Hangout that we did. And we may very well use this technology more in the future as well for the next season of the Natural Health Summit, which comes up in April 2014. We'll have some phenomenal speakers again. Now, on this last season, we had people like David Wolf and Dr. Simon Roger and Michael and Dr. Brad Nelson, Larry Crane, lots of very well-known people. And we were going to have new speakers and maybe a few of the old speakers again on our next season as well. So stay tuned. If you want to get more information, again, you can go to www.naturalhealthsummit.com. And even though the current season is over, when you register there, you will be on my mailing list so that I can let you know about all these phenomenal and exciting new interviews that are going to be coming up this upcoming year. So stay tuned, take care of yourself, and use some of these phenomenal therapies that we talked about. Okay, bye-bye for now.
Bye, Alex. Thanks a lot.